And we begin with updates on the Azerbaijani passenger plane that crashed in Kazakhstan Christmas Day. The Russian government has taken keen interest in what happens after, cautioning now against anyone promoting what it calls hypothesis about the cause of the crash. Some aviation experts suggest the Azerbaijan Airlines plane had been hit by air defense systems over the Russian Republic of Chechnya, and state media in Azerbaijan quote officials as saying a Russian missile was responsible. Before it went down near the Kazakh city of Akdo, the plane was diverted across the Caspian Sea from its destination in Chechnya to western Kazakhstan. Speaking about the issue earlier today, Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said it would be wrong to put forward any hypothesis before the investigation's conclusions. State media in Azerbaijan say preliminary investigation has been concluded and that the plane had been hit by shrapnel from a surface-to-surface war missile from Russia's Pantsir-S defense system. Well, Russian officials have been in touch with authorities on the ground in Akdo, Kazakhstan, to help with the evacuation of Russian citizens to Moscow. The Russian Ministry of Emergencies says 9 Russians, including a child, survived the crash. The plane had diverted from an area of Russia that Moscow had recently defended against Ukrainian drone attacks. The disaster resulted in 38 fatalities and 29 survivors are currently receiving hospital treatment. As we mentioned earlier, it's been a day of mourning in Azerbaijan. Dozens of people were seen mourning today at the Heydar Aliyev International Airport in Baku, which was the departure point, of the Azov flight that crashed in Kazakhstan. People were seen also carrying flowers and paying tributes to the victims of the incident. A minute's silence was held as the citizens express their concern, as well as, the horror of what happened on Wednesday. Even people outside of the building also observed a minute's silence. Meanwhile, relatives of some of the survivors have been speaking about the incidents. One of them is Fizuli Jalilov, the father of Nizami Jalilov, who was injured in the plane crash in Kazakhstan. He says his son is now in good condition, and if everything goes well today and tomorrow, he will come to Baku. Let's see what happens next. In his words, Alilov, who lives in the settlement of Denachi in the north of Azerbaijan, said that his son was going to his relatives in Grozny to celebrate the new year. Nizami Jalilov, born in 1992, was on board the Embraer passenger jet that crashed near the city of Akdo in Kazakhstan on Wednesday, killing 38 people. 29 survivors were taken to hospital in Akdo. President of Azerbaijan, Aliyev, has declared a day of mourning today in the country, saying that the plane crash is a great tragedy in this tremendous and poses tremendous sorrow for the people of Azerbaijan. The Embraer 190 aircraft took off from the Azerbaijani capital, Baku, on Wednesday morning. The company says it was due to fly to Grozny in Chechnya, but it was diverted because of fog. One surviving passenger is reported that the pilot tried twice to land in dense fog over Grozny before the third time when something exploded. Some of the aircraft's skin also blew over. Thanks to this eyewitness video, we can see the moment the Embraer AMBR-3.SA passenger plane flying from Azerbaijan to Russia crashed near the city of Akdo in Kazakhstan Christmas morning. It was carrying 67 passengers and 5 crew members on board. Another eyewitness video posted on social media shows rescuers pulling out survivors from the wreckage of the aircraft. Emergency services said in a statement the fire services had put out the blaze and the survivors, including 2 children, were being treated at a nearby hospital. The bodies of the dead were also being recovered. There were also numerous emergency services vehicles operating on site, as well as apparent remains of bodies of the victims. Following the crash, Azerbaijan President Ilham Aliyev returned home from Russia, where he had been due to attend a summit. Russian President Vladimir Putin expressed his condolences to the Azerbaijan president over the loss of lives. President Aliyev was due to attend the CIS summit in Russia's Leningrad region. President Putin said he had talked to his counterpart and was sure a thorough investigation will be carried out, and that Russia would coordinate the work of its special and aviation services on all issues related to the tragedy. The Azeri prosecutor's office says investigation into the plane crash is underway, but it is too early to speak about the results. Kazakh authorities say 38 people were killed in the crash, while the remainder survived. Welcome back. We're in Syria now, where the new rebel-led authorities say supporters of ousted President Bashar al-Assad have killed 14 Interior Ministry troops in an ambush in the west of the country. They say 10 other troops were wounded in the fighting on Tuesday near the Mediterranean port of Tartus, a stronghold of Assad's minority Alawite Muslim sect. The clashes with pro-Assad loyalists are the first direct challenge to the authority of Syria's de facto leader Ahmad al-Sharaa. Assad's presidency fell to rebel forces led by al-Shara's Islamist Hayat Tahrir al-Sham faction just over 2 weeks ago. Security forces launched an operation in Tartus province earlier today, according to state news agency Sana, in a bid to restore security, stability, and civil peace. Sana reported that the forces had neutralized a number of remnants of Assad's militia in the Tartus countryside, and it was pursuing others. Meanwhile, residents in Al-Wurud, a predominantly Alawite and impoverished neighborhood in northwest of Damascus, have expressed concern following a security crackdown by the HTS to pursue those remnants out of the ousted Bashar al-Assad government. Members of the Alawite minority, an offshoot of Shiite Islam, wielded huge sway in Assad-led Syria, dominating the security forces that he used against his opponents during the 13-year-long civil war and to crush dissent during decades of bloody oppression by his police state. Al-Diriyah, a 72-year-old Alawite sheikh and community leader in Damascus, has voiced his community's growing frustration and fear in the wake of escalating violence and sectarian targeting. Despite assurances of respect and unity, Diriyah describes widespread violations, including armed raids on homes, vandalism, and unprovoked beatings. An HCS soldier in charge of the security checkpoints in the neighborhood said raids are aimed at detaining 2 people, without elaborating on the details, adding that another incident where some people were taken out of a bus and beaten just before being Alawite were not done by HCS but by supporters of the group. Alawite protesters erupted in some cities across Syria after an undated video showing the burning of an Alawite shrine in Aleppo was circulated on social media. Now, Damascus residents are calling for unity after unrest in Tartus and Homs and an attack on police officers, which left multiple people dead and injured. 14 members of the Syrian police were killed in an ambush by forces loyal to the ousted government in the Tartus countryside. The transitional administration said as demonstrations and an overnight curfew elsewhere marked the most widespread unrest since Bashar al-Assad's removal more than 2 weeks ago. Syria's new interior minister said on Telegram 10 police members were also wounded by what he called remnants of the Assad government in Tartus. Syrian police also imposed an overnight curfew on the city of Homs after unrest there linked to demonstrations that residents said were led by members of the minority Alawite and Shiite Muslim religious communities. Well, Russia's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Lavrov, says the new ruler of Syria had called relations with Russia long-standing and strategic, and that Moscow shared this assessment. Kremlin foreign policy aide Yuri Ushakyov said on Monday that Russia was in contact with Syria's new administration at both a diplomatic and military level. Mr. Lavrov mentioned the role of Turkey in Syria's political upturn, saying, "We understand the legitimate concerns of the Turkish leadership, the Turkish people regarding security on the border with Syria, where incidents related to terrorist structures that cause disorder have repeatedly occurred. These legitimate security interests must be ensured, but they must be ensured in such a way that Syria retains its sovereignty, territorial integrity, unity, and in favor of this. The Turkish leadership speaks in favor of all of this, and we support this." Also, the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has arrived in Turkey for talks with the Turkish officials regarding Syria's future, just as President Joe Biden's administration prepares to exit in January. It's been pushing for an inclusive transition in neighboring Syria following the overthrow of President Bashar al-Assad. Before landing in Turkey, Mr. Blinken visited Jordan and met with King Abdullah. He's expected to meet with Turkish President Recep Erdogan. Blinken is in the region to seek support and establish a unified approach for principles that Washington hopes will guide the political transition in Syria. Let's discuss the developments in Syria now. Joining me is the former permanent representative of the Nigerian mission at the United Nations, Ambassador Joseph Ayalogo, who joins me from the United Kingdom. Ambassador, thank you for joining me on the program. A Merry Christmas to you.
Merry Christmas, good evening, and Merry Boxing Day. I'm still expecting my box.
I tell you, it is on its way. I don't know what's wrong with the postal system these days. I guess it's all the Christmas rush. That's why parcels are being delayed. But we appreciate your being here on the program. So a lot has happened today in Syria and, of course, this week as well, following from the removal of the Bashar al-Assad government. Let's begin with the attack on those members of the Interior Ministry earlier today that were killed by loyalists to President Bashar al-Assad. He is out of the country, but he does seem to still exert some sort of control on Syria through these loyalists, through these forces that are still on the ground. What do you make of how they have succeeded in still staying relevant despite Assad's exit?
Well, thank you. Well, the Syrian civil war, which started around 2011, it's quite a complex mix. The belligerents, they're all Syrians largely, but separated by either political, ethnic, religious leanings. And Bashar eventually, Assad, eventually capitulated and left the scene. But of course, I would say that he is either directly calling the shots or that his supporters who feel that they can still pull some strings and do some damage are still on ground. So that is why you see, even though Assad had left, but their supporters are still here and they're causing havoc or creating the sort of situation that led to the killing of 14 policemen. Well, it tells us that the civil war has, although the civil war has formally ended, but it hasn't fully stopped. That the National Committee government still has a lot of work to do, that trying to bring peace, trying to prevent and making sure that various conflicting forces in the country that has held sway for the past 13 years would either be encouraged, coerced, or forced to shed their swords and then begin to form a new Syria government administration, at least to begin to bring peace to that country that's been torn by civil war for so many years.
So this is some parts of Syria are still not able to celebrate, the fall of the Assad government, and they say it's because of the presence of those Israeli Defense Forces along most of the border communities, and this is because of the rebel groups that exist in those areas. So even though the HTS is in control of Damascus, that seems to be the only area where they yield any real control and hold on power in Syria. The rest of Syria, it seems, is being controlled by other rebel groups, giving us, this impression that what's happening in Syria is currently, what exists in Libya. Can any real government emerge from this?
Well, it's possible, of course, depending on how matters play out from now. The Libyan situation has continued for quite some time. Well, because, yes, the central figure has left, but there are supporters or opposing groups who do their bit depending on their own little group interest. Some are even bandits, terrorists, and so on. So it is quite possible that the Libyan situation is repeated in Syria. But I think that there is quite a lot of interest from outside, like Turkey, like Russia, like the US, trying to see whether there would be an attempt to either negotiate or press the various groups to make peace and so on. I can see that Blinken is already in Turkey to discuss how Turkey can play a role in bringing peace to Syria, especially as Turkey has played a great deal of role so far in the conflict. And I also see that even in Russia, the position, the transition government has made comments that seem to satisfy the Russians. I mean, they say that they have strong ties with Russia in the past. So with all this, one can hope that at the end of the day, or sooner than later, hopefully quicker than in Libya, that there would be a reduction in the forces of the various pressure groups, and then the ascendancy of either a unity government or a transition government that is strong enough to set up an effective government in Damascus and gradually bring in others by persuasion, by force, by negotiation under the same umbrella. We can't rule out that there would be tension for some time. That is a fact. It's not like some of the civil wars that, if we go back to the Nigerian Civil War, when it stopped, it stopped. Because the central government was definitely under control. The opposition forces had collapsed and had accepted the concept of coming together. But that is the reality of the Syrian situation, not this time.
Indeed, and those rebel forces don't even recognize the authority of the HTS right now over Syria. I guess the only reason why they really haven't pushed for their own influence is the fact that they're limited as to weapons, I guess, and then, support from various countries and the groups that are supporting them as well. There's also been a target of the Alawite community, the Alawite tribe of Syria, which is the tribe that Bashar al-Assad and his family belong to. It seems like they're being targeted by the HTS, even though the HTS has denied it. I mean, it was inevitable that this would happen, given that, the Assad family had ruled Syria for almost 50 years, if not more than 50 years. What do you think would happen to the group, even though the HTS says it's not targeting any particular group, but other rebel groups could target the Alawites because of what the Assad government did when it was in power, and by virtue of the fact that Assad's father wanted to make a dynasty out of Syria?
Yeah, well, that is the reality. That is the scenario. The Alawite family group under the Ba'athist regime played a dominant, would I say also bloody role, and their relationship with other groups were not that friendly. With the current situation, definitely it's not unexpected that they would be a target. Well, the worry is whether that would impact on the efforts to bring peace, so that the transition government must try to ensure that it protects their interests, or the lives of the Alawites. And if they can't do that, perhaps a third force, maybe the United Nations, would be invited or can come in and try to be a peacekeeping force. It's happened in a few other cases, so it's quite possible that this aspect can be tried. But there is no surprise that the Ba'athist, former Ba'athist groups or the Alawites would be a target for vengeance at this time, and it is also definite that this is not going to help the reconciliation and establishment of peace and stability in the government, in the country, so that all interested parties should make sure that bloodletting by various groups, whether justified or not, should actually not be what would be in play at this time.
President Bashar al-Assad has been a guest of the Russian President Vladimir Putin since he was toppled, Russia being his first choice when he left Syria. We understand he's moved millions of dollars from Syria over the past few years into Russia. He still has investments in the country. He's living quite the life still a life of luxury. Excuse me, even though there haven't been reports, from there of, how exactly they're living day to day in Russia. But how long do you think the Russian president will have him on as a guest? Because I think he does have some interest in going back to Syria. Last week, or about 2 weeks ago, he did release a statement. I believe it was a statement from him, although this was on social media, where he said he didn't have any intentions. He did not intend to leave Syria. It was because the HTS, rolled into Damascus. He saw the way things were going, and then he had to leave, had to flee. Do you think that he has, or he might possibly return to Syria? Or do you think he'll continue to be an inevitable and a perpetual guest of the Russian president, who has so graciously offered him political asylum?
Well, it's not surprising that Russia offered him asylum. Russia, in the first place, helped to prop him on for quite a long time. Now that the tables have turned against him, and he is in Russia and living under as a friendly asylum seeker, living quite well, it's better for him, in the interest of Syria, his country, to stay there. It's also in the interest of Russia, especially with regard to relationship with the regime, to make sure that he does not constitute a menace to Russia, to Syria's attempt to stabilize by encouraging groups in Syria to fight against the government. I should say that the transitional government should work at extracting that commitment from Russia, so that while Assad is in their country, he should just stay there as a private citizen, quietly, without causing trouble. That he took quite a lot of money is also in the style of dictators. When they leave, most of the time they leave with a lot of money so that they can live well wherever they are. We don't know what length of time he can be in Russia as their guest, but for his sake, he would. If he doesn't give any problem to relationship between Russia and Syria, it also depends on how the transition government forms itself and establishes itself as a force in in Syria, so that it enjoys the respect of Russia, and Russia would also reciprocate by keeping their guests under proper wraps. So it all depends on how the current situation develops. That is, stability occurs. Assad becomes just an ordinary refugee in Russia and keeping low profile. I don't see him coming back again. Definitely, I don't think he can come back again. So it's just a matter of just lying low nicely and quietly in his country of refuge.
Well, indeed. So much to unpack here, with Syria's President Bashar al-Assad in Russia. We have to explore a little further, I guess, how well he's living in Russia and what type of guest he is to the Russian president, if he really is enjoying his company. Thank you again, Ambassador Joseph Ayalogu, for joining us on the program.
Thank you, March.
We're off on another break now on The World Today. Still ahead. The Dyke Heights Christmas lights light up in Brooklyn, New York. We'll take a look when we return. Stay with us. Welcome back. South Korea lawmakers have commenced an impeachment motion against Prime Minister and acting President Han Duck-soo. They submitted the motion after Mr. Han refused to appoint 3 justices to fill the Constitutional Court bench that is reviewing President Yoon Suk-yeol's impeachment. After the impeachment motion was introduced, South Korea's lawmakers voted in favor of the 3 nominees of Constitutional Court judges at the plenary session. The court should have 9 justices, but the appointment of the 3 members has been upheld by political infighting. The Constitutional Court holds its first hearing on Friday in the case of Yoon after Parliament impeached him over his short-lived martial law decree on December 3rd. Hundreds of Indian Ocean tsunami survivors and family members of the victims are commemorating its 20th anniversary in various parts of Aceh, Indonesia. Family members of the deceased gathered at a mass grave in Ule Leu village, scattering flower petals on gravestones. Many were seen crying and hugging their family members. Local residents say that they lost wives, children, parents, and in-laws to the tsunami and the 9.1 magnitude earthquake that triggered it. None of their bodies were found. Hundreds of survivors also attended a memorial service at the mosque where they sat in silence for 3 minutes as a mark of respect and then prayed after. Aceh accounted for more than half of the total of 230,000 people who died from the disaster. Japan Airlines has been hit by a cyber attack that caused delays to some domestic and international flights. Authorities say the attack, which began at 7:24 a.m., affected the company's internal and external systems, forcing the company to shut down a router, which had started causing system malfunctions, and also suspended ticket sales for flights departing today. Earlier this week, U.S. carrier American Airlines briefly grounded all flights for an hour, disrupting travel for thousands on Christmas Eve due to a technical glitch involving its network hardware. Well, we're moving on to here in Nigeria, where a tragedy has occurred of children and people who died while participating in a philanthropy exercise in 3 cities in the country, in the Federal Capital Territory, Abuja, here in, in Ibadan, in Oyo State, as well as in Anambra State. Those tragedies have resulted in a lot of reactions to them. Much earlier, my colleague Layo Olarinde spoke with the philanthropist, founder and philanthropist, Ibijoke Adiagbo Foundation, Ibijoke Adiagbo herself, on the situation as well as what can be done.
What my foundation has been doing is going on the street and picking up children from the street and putting them in school and making sure they have access to education. And we also provide feeding for these children when they're in school, because as you would appreciate, without food, they cannot study. So what we've been doing basically is to make sure the children have food in their stomach when they're accessing education.
Indeed, talking about food, it's a major one for all humans. Food is very important. And I believe you've heard the unfortunate incidents that have happened in Nigeria in the past week. As a philanthropist, how do you feel about this?
First of all, my heart goes out to the 35 families that lost their children in the Ibadan tragedy. And also my heart goes out to those who lost their life in Abuja and in Anambra. I pray that we would not witness this again. This is really very sad, because I know the intention of those philanthropies was not for this to happen. It is quite unfortunate that this is what happened. However, having said that, because there's so much poverty in the land and people are so hungry, anytime anyone hears that there's going to be some philanthropic activities, people go there in their thousands. And therefore, the country needs to actually regulate this. There needs to be strong legislation around this. If you are trying to organize a session where you want to give out things to people, knowing that there's poverty in the land, there needs to be some legislation around it. The legislations must come up with rules and regulation of what constitutes crowd and what sort of crowd control mechanism have you got in place. Having put the legislation in place, there needs to be the regulation. And the regulation could be done by the local authority, whereby before you organize anything like this, you need to apply to the local government and get a license. And when you apply for that license, you also complete what we call the risk assessment form to be able to explain how you intend to mitigate anything going wrong during that session. Once these are in place, the organizers also need to demonstrate what measures they've put in place, what security officers, how many are going to be in place, how do you plan to safeguard these children? So if all these are in place, we'll be able to mitigate things like this happening again in future.
Indeed. But what do you think, was the problem at these events? Some have said poor crowd management on the part of those organizing and getting the gifts. What would you say was the problem?
There was poor crowd control. Because they've gone on the radio to announce this, so people have gone there in their thousands. And I do not seem to see the mechanism which the organizers have put in place to control the crowd. They said they went on the radio to tell them, don't go there anymore. That is not crowd control. You need to have boots on the ground. You need to have security personnel on the ground that will restrain these people from coming to the venue. What can they demonstrate what they did along those lines? Other than saying on the radio that do not come there. These people are hungry.
And that'll be all on The World today. Sorry I couldn't bring you that other Christmas story tomorrow, no doubts. Thanks for watching. I'm Amarachi Ubani.